Well, I'm excited for our panelists today, people that over the years I've become friends with and journeyed and seen their journey, and it's all been, from my view, obviously there's highs and lows to any business journey, but these three speakers that we have today have all certainly had successes in the things that they're doing. I'm not going to give all the details of their introductions because I've asked them to. Oh, can we just make sure we keep our microphones on mute? There's a few people that haven't got that down yet, which just is going to help. I don't want to name and shame you because I can see. Maybe I'll just do it for you. Hold on a second. Let me just help you.
It's whack-a-mole.
There we go. I've done it. All right. Yeah. So look, but I guess I just want to say a couple of things before I get our speakers to introduce themselves. Michael Malone, many of you may have watched his journey for many years, but from garage literally to $1 billion company, and on the success of that now being invited to sit on the board of some of the greatest companies in Australia, I think is pretty phenomenal. And Michael and I fortuitously met last year and have just spent a bit of time together since then, talking around Perth startups and investments. And whilst he spends some time in Sydney, he's obviously a lot of focus and interest in Perth and helping here and starting to think about what that could look like again. So we're excited to have Michael speaking to us today. We then got Dr. Marcus Tan, who Health Engine at the moment is definitely one of the darlings of the tech world. And Marcus and I have been friends for about 5 years, and again, journeyed together, shared good times and harder times together. And we've, through that period, actually also spent a fair bit of time working in a foundation together called Meridian Global. So Health Engine is an interesting situation where they had some challenges a year ago, and suddenly they've now got an amazing opportunity that's come out of COVID, which I'm sure Marcus will talk about. And then Sharon Grosser, who's also been a friend of mine for the last 4 or 5 years, and involved in the company she founded called Seqta, which is in the education space. And she probably, if you've picked up Sharon on your feed so far, you'll see she's got the best background of everyone, because she is actually in bushland. And this is one of the amazing things that gets to happen when you build a successful company. You get to go and buy a big block of land and do stuff on it, which is what she's doing. So she's dialing in on the phone from there. But Seqta, again, has been an amazing tech story out of Perth in education and helping schools around Australia and now around the world. So all really stoked to have you guys with us. But what I might let you do, just if you're all happy, just giving sort of 2 or 3 minutes, give your version of your intro background and maybe a little bit of what you're up to now, because you know, things are obviously changing a little bit. And yeah, Michael, if it's all right, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, Michael Malone. I graduated at UWA, grew up in Perth. So I started up iiNet straight out of university. I often get asked how. It was just leaving university. There was no internet and service providers in Western Australia. So I moved back in with my parents, 2 DX266 computers and 5 modems. And that was how iiNet got started. These days, I ran iiNet for 21 years, including a listing on the stock exchange, and exited. I left there in 2014, so 5 years ago, and it subsequently got taken out by TPG. So now, as Derek mentioned, I'm sitting on a number of boards, including NBN Co, 7 West Media, some junior telcos, and a few others. And my little lesser known tidbit I'll point out is Marcus and I first met in a Toastmasters club over 15 years ago.
Oh, wow, is that right?
Let him go next on that.
Well, that's a good intro, Marcus. So yeah, tell us about it. Thanks, Michael, by the way. Who would have thought? I was thinking when iiNet started that who would be these years now where, you know, internet has progressed so much. We're on video calls during a global pandemic. It's crazy, really, use of technology, but that's good. All right, thank you for that brief intro. Marcus, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So yeah, Marcus Tan. So I'm, as Derek said, I'm a founder, CEO and medical director for Health Engine. Like Michael, I'm also a UWA graduate, but I'm a medical doctor by background, so I still see patients on a Saturday morning just to keep my hand in. I founded Health Engine back in 2006, and basically it was just to solve a problem of mine, which was just around finding doctors, you know, instead of using a paper-based directory, being able to find them online. So and that evolved to becoming a booking service, and it's become a platform now that's basically used by about 3.5 million users a month to manage their healthcare with their health providers, doctors, dentists, and physios, and so on. In that time, we've actually probably been, we've been very, very fortunate actually to be backed by some fairly large venture capitalists. Telstra Ventures, Seven West Media, Larsen Ventures, and Sequoia Capital are our major backers. And we've got some other sort of pretty prominent tech entrepreneurs as backers as well, which is kind of cool. So that's me. The only thing I'll maybe call out to shoot back something to Michael is that I really want to thank iiNet, because we've got some awesome people who are working from us who are all ex-iiNetters. So I think one of them's even on this call. So
that's good.
So thanks for that.
Yeah. Cut the cloth on the trade, and then learn all the mistakes, and then move over to Health Engine. Good deal.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. And Sharon, from your block, do you want to tell us a bit about your background and Seqta and the story there?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Oh, you've moved.
I've moved inside a caravan because the wind was getting a bit loud. Okay, I'm a UWA graduate as well. And then I did teaching. So I was an English teacher for about 20 years. And Seqta started because technology was coming into schools and making teachers' lives very miserable. So my husband, Grant, thought he could do it better. He usually thinks he can do it better than everybody else, whatever it is, for those of you who know him. So yeah, we were the classic kitchen table startup, had zero clue, never heard of tech startups, never heard of anything really. And grew Seqta from 2006. And I've just, Grant left the business at the end of last year, and I've just left, about a month ago. And I've got some, we've got great iiNet employees as well, just saying.
Oh, the call outs to iiNet. I didn't go to UWA and I don't use iiNet, so I'll just throw that out there as well. Sorry. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. That's great. So let me, we're just going to go questions to each of the panelists as we go through. And the first one I wanted to ask is just, if you can think about a significant crisis that you had in the business context previously. So we're not talking about COVID now, we're just thinking about crisis that you've experienced. And then what was that? And what was just something that you learned through that? Because often it's about coming out the other side that you think is relevant that we could learn from today in terms of what we're all going through. And Marcus, I'll just throw that one to you first.
Sure. So I think the easy one here is that for those of you who aren't aware, but when Derek was referencing a particular crisis that we had, this was actually 2 years ago, not so much a year ago. But the time has certainly flown. But what happened to us is that we actually had, about 2 years ago, we had some significant negative media coverage about some aspects of our marketplace that we'd actually sort of created. Really, it wasn't very core, but we'd created it about 4 to 5 years prior to that. And this is when we were a really small tech startup. And funnily, you talk about the ups and downs of being in startup. But I remember the sort of negative media coverage actually coming out the same week that we were awarded sort of WA Technology Company of the Year. So we're riding the highs and and the lows all in the same week. And it was interesting for us because even though we knew that nothing malicious or nefarious was going on, like despite what was being reported in the media, it was really distressing because a lot of this just came out of the blue. Like it was, we were probably a little bit naive as a fast-growing startup, and made some incorrect assumptions and some honest mistakes in execution, which we were unaware of. But we'd found ourselves with basically a product failure and a PR crisis on our hands, and that was something that was really difficult because we just completely unaware, completely blindsided. So what did we do and learn from that particular experience? I guess what it did was it and how has that helped us sort of going today with the current crisis that we're in. I think where it landed was that we knew that we couldn't stop the media saying what they wanted to say, and we learned that at the time it was probably out because it was out of our control. Worrying about it was a real waste of energy. So we basically end up focusing on what we could control, right? And so a lot of it was around going back to the basics, right? Like understanding why we're around. So being mission driven, helping patients and providers, just focusing on our customers. And then, being values driven, right? So in our business, we have what we call CURLIA, CURLIA, which is basically the acronym for our values, and C is care. So for us, a lot of it was focusing on making sure our people were in a good place and caring for our customers. U was for urgency. So we wanted to move really quickly to fix the things that were broken and making sure it was right. R is for rationality. And so for us, it's, sort of being honest with ourselves of what actually happened and not sort of kidding ourselves that that it wasn't good.
Yep.
L was around learning. So like working out what happened and the root causes and obviously, doing that. And then basically I, internal locus control. So backing ourselves. And A was authenticity. So, around communicating honestly with our stakeholders and not gilding the lily too much. But yeah, so those are the sort of main things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we could just finish now. We've got the answer clear. Apply that and we're done. That's so good. Yeah. Awesome. All right, thanks, Marcus. Maybe Sharon, same question for you. So thinking about a significant crisis that your business faced and how did you get through it and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, I think, crisis is a matter of perspective. I've said before that, when we first started, I felt I lived in crisis, not the first year of our business because that was just complete, blissful ignorance. But for the years 2 to 5, I felt like I was in permanent crisis because, we're going to run out of money. The product didn't work. I was like, I just felt sick for, 3 years.
Right.
And I remember, speaking at a thing when it was just around the time when those schoolgirls got kidnapped in Kenya, I think, or Uganda. And I remember thinking that whatever problems I had, compared to, having my child kidnapped or having to put my family on a boat, to possibly die, to get out of a war zone or something, it really put it in perspective. So I think, in lots of ways, I just felt like we lurched from crisis to crisis. But at the end of the day, it's about perspective. And I think, what Marcus said, it's about what you can control and looking at what you can control. And what you can do is every day you get up and you put one foot in front of the other and you keep doing what you know in your heart is the right thing to do. And it's not something that you can kind of figure out in advance, I guess. It's like in the moment, like I really like that authenticity thing because, as Marcus said, you're driven by this internal passion and purpose and you're doing it for reasons that, no one else is ever really going to understand, but you just keep doing that thing. And I'm grateful. I live in Australia. What's the worst that can happen? We mortgaged our house. Big deal. We lose our house. We're in Australia. I'm not in some developing country where I'm literally, my children are going to die of starvation.
Yeah.
And it's about perspective.
Yeah, awesome. I like it. That's so good already hearing Marcus about values and they become real. And then Sharon, like you're saying, perspective and the persevering through that. That's great. So, so Michael, maybe your view on that, just again, question around a significant crisis your business faced and what you learned through that.
I like Sharon's comment about lurching from crisis to crisis. I was going to say something like that. That's a story of my adult life. But it's, and I guess one of the reasons I love being involved in as a non-executive director in these companies is there's always at least one of them in crisis at any given time. And we just put one of those companies, put a $1 billion company, just went into Chapter 11 on Friday. 7 West Media is, of course, free to air. Revenues is down 40+% in the last 3 months. But and I went through lots at iiNet, but I'm going to pick one, which was 2006. When due to a confluence of various events, the company got itself into serious strife and, as in existential for the business. And we had, over 1,000 staff. So as, as Sharon said, it's not just about, my own ego as well. You've got a lot of people's livelihoods and customers there as well. Yeah. And that was a case of where we had some problems with the reporting that meant we were overstating our revenue, but spending as if the revenue was actually there. So found ourselves in a hole once we realised that the billing system was accurate and the reporting systems were not. But the end result of that, though, was the company found itself in suspension on the stock exchange. I offered my resignation and the board accepted it. And there was a moment there where it just felt like everything was really over. And some lessons that did come out of that for me, though, was, until then, it all felt like so much fun. It was still a startup. And, there was this theme of, eventually the board will work it out and get a real CEO. So, and to Sharon's point, what was the worst that would happen here? You know, it didn't. But I guess from that point onwards, you know, we had a plan, but the world shifted, and you know, we had to sort of, and we brought in external parties who, you know, you often say a consultant, you pay them just to read your watch and tell you the time. And it's, you know, it was a bit like that, but we had a crisis of confidence inside the business that we didn't believe ourselves anymore. So having someone external come in and sit down with us and work through it. Having a plan is really important. We live in a complex world. If you don't have a plan, you won't go anywhere, or not of your own volition, but don't fall in love with the plan either. Because, you know, and that's, I think, an important thing for now. But yes, I'd say, you know, being humble enough to say, I can't do this on my own. We're reviewing the current plan when situations changed, but then, you know, setting sail with the new plan confidently. Yeah,
no, that's great. I like that. And it's, I mean, I think as you're alluding to, you see this a little bit in your non-exec director roles, but I know in some of the board roles I've got it, it's sometimes you feel like, well, what value can I add? But it's amazing just someone who's not in the detail, who then has that other perspective that can just look at things a different way in a crisis. How often that can just be the sounding board that you need, or that different perspective or something like that. So yeah, it's great advice. And I'll just open up to all three of you to answer this one if you've got, and it's more just about any, you know, I know through your business journeys, you've had so many other crisis points, and you know, we just wanted to hear at least one story that you're thinking about, but and how that relates to one learning. But just more broadly, any other tips or thoughts you wanted to talk about when it comes to just that general crisis planning? And I'd love that we've heard values, we've you know, we've heard the persevering and these things that we're hearing, but just anything else that's on your mind that you'd like to share with us?
I'm happy to go. So I think when it comes to crisis, I mean, obviously, I mean, I'm assuming that most of the people on this call are founders, right? So, you know, when it comes to leadership, I mean, we as founders are basically, we have to make the call. That's our job, right? And it's not, you know, it's not easy to be making calls in volatile, uncertain, complex, you know, ambiguous environments, right? But you have to make it. And you know, I mean, obviously, it's the balancing act of being able to pull the trigger, you know, when you need to pull the trigger, and to keep the powder dry, like, you know, because you've got so much information coming to you, and you're not sure exactly which is the right thing to actually do. I think I don't know whether you guys have actually been introduced to this book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. But the second chapter, it's a fantastic book. I'd recommend it highly for any startup founder. But the second chapter is called I Will Survive. And the title of it is basically, you know, of the subsection is, if you have to eat shit, don't nibble. And that's actually it's a common thing that I would actually recommend to like use as a framework to, like, for most things where if it's hard, just bite down and do it. Don't just nibble at it, like, because it says it all really. So that's I would proffer.
I like it. That's good. Great. Michael and Sharon. Yeah, Michael, you got something? Yep.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Following on from what Marcus said, I think you know, consensus management is really important. Being able to go around and talk to people and get their opinions. But you know, when the ship is sinking, you don't expect the captain to go and get consensus. You expect him to say, "Get in the fucking lifeboat." And I think that's what we all need in a crisis. You need people to be able to say, someone has to stand up and take command, at least if it's only with the simple things to get through right now. And then we can all get our heads together and try and work out what the next steps are.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, sometimes you don't notice how much people look to you until things are going badly, and then all of a sudden it's like all the heads turn and they're all just looking at you, and you don't have to pretend that you've got it all together, but you do have to go, well, you know, you have to make a decision, and making no decision is never the right thing. Even if it's the wrong decision, you don't know it's the wrong decision until, you know, you've got hindsight. And so making a decision, and then just, you know, people will line up behind you because they want to, they need to, you know, they trust you. And you've got, you know, that the trust of the team. They'll walk over hot coals. They'll walk into hell for you. And even if you get it wrong, it's okay, because they trust you and they know that, you know, you're all in it for the right reasons and doing the best.
Yeah. No, it's good. I think, that whole thing of being decisive, and in some ways, you know, part of what I've been reading and thinking about at this time is, that decisive leadership is so important. And there's a saying, which is people are down on what they're not up on. And in some ways, if you're not making those decisions and not communicating frequently and transparently, people tend to go to the worst case scenario in their mind, even though it's not true. So the idea of actually getting on that front foot with that communication, and even if it's the wrong thing in the long run, but the best decision you can make at this point in time, you're better off making that and giving them something to fall in line behind. I mean, just on that theme, this isn't a question that I'd sort of prompted for you, but just coming to mind as you're talking, what would you all think about, or tips you'd give on that balance between, okay, the business is in a really tough spot, we've got to make some hard financial decisions, and for all of you, you know, your companies grew on the back of amazing people, and so often it's about navigating through that with staff costs or letting people go or things. And I always think there's a humane and an inhumane way to do that. But any thoughts you've got there on how you kind of navigate the company through in challenging financial times, and at the same time, I guess, show honour and compassion to people? What does that look like?
We've always, I think, erred on the side of transparency, if it's a thing. And again, because it's around, you know, just we're in this together, you know, we're doing this as a team. And people started calling our business a family, and it's also great, you know, it's like a family. And I'm like, stop calling it a family. You know, families are dysfunctional messes, most of the ones that I know. You know, and I'd much rather think about us as, you know, a high performing sports team or something, where we are here because we've got a common goal. And everything we do, you know, from, you know, making decisions around coffee and corporate plants and things to, you know, hiring and letting people go, it has to be lining up. And every decision that we make, it's almost like you could look at the wall and look at the values and look at the mission and go, we're doing it because of this. And then people understand, if you have to make a hard call, it's because this thing is bigger than all of us. You know, we didn't start a company so that we could, I don't know, have our sign on a building. We started a company so that we could achieve this thing that we're trying to do for the people that we care about. And once everybody really gets that and understands that, they get that you have to make hard decisions, and they're kind of okay with it. Yeah,
great. Marcus and Michael, any thoughts on dealing with the people aspect?
Well, I think I'll just endorse what Sharon said quickly and hand over to Marcus. But I think, we do. It's too easy to forget why we got into these businesses in the first place, especially as the company grows. That's a really good point. And just trying to keep back to that, strategies change, technology changes, product changes. But, if you can hang on to the themes of what you stood for and why your company exists in the first place, then, those things are consistent and persistent.
Yeah, awesome. Great, Marcus.
Yeah, no, I haven't really got much to add to that. I think that's exactly spot on. I mean, a lot of it's cultural. If you're hiring people who, again, like can back themselves, because, I mean, it's a weird time right now, only because, there are few jobs, no one's really hiring. But historically, like letting people go is never a fun thing. It's always an emotional thing. But there's always this feeling, certainly in our business, that look, we hire great people. They will always be able to get good jobs, and we'll help them find the next job if that's the case. But they'll always understand very transparently why we've made certain decisions, and they'll because they're rational people, and we've hired them on those values and principles. And so really, it's down to culture.
Yeah, very good.
We need some questions we can disagree on, Derek. We need some.
That's right. Okay, give me one. You all went to UWA, so you've got the same teaching. That's why it comes out like this, I think. All right. So next question. Obviously, with any crisis comes both the risks you've got to manage, but also comes opportunities. And I've seen some people trying to inappropriately take advantage of opportunities and kind of offending everyone around them because they're probably pushing too hard. And yet there's other opportunities that make a whole lot of sense. I think, Michael, like you shared earlier, you've got some companies that are at the one end, crash and burning, and at the other end, there's companies that have got opportunities before them. And I'm seeing a pretty similar thing. In fact, one of the companies I work with has got software that the World Health Organization suddenly picked up to use to track COVID cases, and they're going gangbusters and can't keep up with it. And at the other end, people are laying off staff and everything in between. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, just curious, I guess, for the three of you, thoughts on balancing in a crisis that's managing the risk versus the opportunity. And why don't we go to Sharon first? I think you haven't answered one first yet.
Well, I guess the business that we're in, you know, online education, it's kind of frustrating in a way because, you know, you have long, you know, conversations that go for 5 years with like an education department in a particular state or a big education organisation about, you know, why, you know, the solution that you're giving would be a great solution. And then all of a sudden COVID happens and everyone's scrambling and you're like, I could have like helped you with this. So I guess, you know, we provide online learning and people need to do online learning. So it's not kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't mean to sound flippant because people are going through horrible situations, but it's kind of okay for us, for our business.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and more broadly, I guess over the years you had the business, were there other things that sort of came up that were a crisis moment that you had to either just mitigate as a risk or take advantage of?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, the point we got to where we were like, are we like close the business down, or are we going to completely rewrite the entire back end while we keep the front end the same and keep, I think maybe we only had, I don't know, 50 or 60 schools on board at that point, but that was like a decision. It's like, we either stop now, cut our losses, say sorry to all our people who gave us money and, you know, crawl back to, I don't know, I wanted to leave the country actually because I was so terrified that I'd let all these people down. Or you take the decision and go, we're just going to rewrite and, you know, carry on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Michael?
Yeah.
I think I'm looking at not just at COVID, I suppose, but more generically. I think during a crisis, it's really, you know, you've got to deal with the crisis. So it's very easy to become all consumed with that. And I guess our jobs as founders or as directors is to try and say, well, what about the longer term? How do we still get out of the muck of today and have a look at what the world's going to look like in 12 months, 5 years? And that's really hard. So this is where, you know, those, you know, the corporate offsites can actually be quite useful in that situation, or some way we can leave your phone behind or whatever. But I'm thinking of one company where I become a board member on it, and every month was a new crisis. And so we'd be 6 or 7, I remember one time of 6 or 7 hours into a meeting before the first item for board decision came up. And I literally let my head bang on the board table. But it's an easier way to manage, you know, because it's easier to say, well, what's happened in the last month? And let's talk about that, rather than to say, what do we think the world's going to look like in 12 months or 2 years, which is predictable. So I think trying to find a way, whatever the crisis is, trying to find a way to take some time out and just say, what can we look past this? What if tomorrow is not the end and we're left with this thing in 1, 2, 5 years? Then, you know, try and make decisions through that prism.
Yeah, sure. And Marcus, just again in crisis, and then I'm going to go to sort of more COVID specific things after this, but just that generic, although I guess there's some interesting opportunities for you when it comes to COVID as well. So.
No, well, I'm going to actually probably answer this question fairly generically as well. I think back my management consulting days. So I love myself a 2x2 matrix and some frameworks. But let me sort of answer it this way, right? So the first rule of any startup, and most of you guys will know this, is that you've got to survive long enough to basically find a solution to a large enough problem people will pay for. So let's just use that as an underpinning thing. The second rule of startup is that survival is contingent on really two things: cash and love, right? So the love of the founders for the business and each other, your team and customers, investors for your for your business, right? And the first rule of any crisis for a startup, as far as and sort of a counterpoint to Michael's thing, is that if you don't deal with the short term, there is no long term. Okay, so you just got to sort out what's going to happen in the crisis before you even think about what's going on long term. Notwithstanding the fact that some of the decisions you make in that crisis will impact your long term. All right. Yeah. But the answer to the question around how do you balance the risk with opportunities is actually it depends on how much cash you have, and the 2x2 matrix on speed and cost to unlocking the opportunity that you have. So if you can't work out how long it's going to unlock, right, or how much it's going to cost, then it's very much dependent on how much cash you have before you run out of it. So don't run out of cash is basically the main thing, and then after that, it's a balancing out.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess what I hear you guys saying is, because I guess part of the conversation is, do you take this as an opportunity to pivot the business and move in another direction because of what COVID's presenting? And effectively, it's about not come back to who you are, the core of your business, remember why you started it. And I like that whole analogy of cost versus speed. And it's the short-term perspective, being able to move very quickly to get through that, and then the longer-term planning where that fits in. It's good. All right, I'm going to have one more question. So if people have got questions in their mind, start writing them down, and we'll go through those. And really, it's just I guess what are you all seeing when it comes to COVID specifically? Just things that companies are doing, how they're responding, whether that's just some cool ideas or initiatives that you've heard and you're starting to think about in your business, just from around the traps that you could share with us that we can learn from.
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, so I can go. So basically, to your point about pivoting, I mean, we've had to pivot to, quite a few of our clinics customers who are, clinics offering some pretty high risk procedures like dentists and so on had to close. And so a lot of our offering had to move online. So we ended up pivoting to telehealth. Interestingly, I was speaking to a pet sitting marketplace, pet sitting, pet walking type of marketplace, where obviously their customers are sort of, going away on travel and so on. And so nowadays, nobody is needing to have anybody else walk their dog. In fact, their dogs are probably so walked out that they're not wanting more walking. So what they end up doing is that they end up pivoting to offering pet food, which I thought was pretty cool. And then there was this supermarket chain that basically, the rush on toilet paper that everybody was joking about. So rather than sort of adding security and shaming anyone who was really sort of doing that, all they did was they basically just adjusted their price. So the first pack of toilet paper was a regular price, and the second one was $100. So they basically just moved the levers that they knew that they could move without, and being creative about it rather than worrying about stuff they couldn't, that they couldn't do. So I thought that was
focus on the things we can. Yeah. Sharon and Michael, any things you've been seeing around in terms of company responses to COVID that's interesting?
I'll look at the generic, I suppose, again, is that I think the majority of the population, I think 80+% of people genuinely believe that when this is over, life will go back to normal. And I think that's really quite frightening. This is not the GFC or the .com crash, where I think for most people, their lives didn't really change, right? You may have had people that were out of work or facing changes in their job environment, but life went on. Whereas I really do think this is going to be one of those pivot points, to steal Marcus's point, where the world is not going to be the same in a year than it was a year ago. And there's some really positives about that. I mean, I'm not going back to an office 10 days a week. I haven't worn a suit this year. These are good things, but for other businesses, and I'm using an example here where one company I know, his business is about online bookings and, for events. Now that business is very challenged, and he's saying to himself, well, what do I do now? Do I look at, there's alternatives here where you can do like selling merchandise, or looking at getting, linking stars up with the customers, or do you batten down, pull the costs in, and really say, look, we're going to cut all the costs inside this business and wind back until we can get out of this. Yeah. And in his case, of course, the answer is you've got to do both. Okay, the world is, if you sit down now and say, I'm just going to buckle down until things come back to normal, you've just given up control. So we don't know when things are going to get back to normal, if ever. On the other hand, try 2 or 3 of these adjacencies. Well, if you had the resources, you would have done these anyway, right? You would have given it a go. Try a few things and fail on them, and some of them might actually take off. And look, the best case outcome for him here is both lines work, as in business does return, and some of these adjacencies end up being winners. But I think we've got to walk and chew gum during these crises. Yeah,
no, it's good. I like that. It's great advice. Sharon, anything to add to that? Just things you've been seeing in terms of, I know you've been getting your block ready, so I don't know if you're aware COVID's happening or anything. I'm kidding. But anything you've been seeing that, that we can learn from?
Probably nothing to add to what the guys have said. I just think that COVID's it's a really good opportunity for a reset in lots of ways. And I don't want to get all existential and philosophical and all that kind of thing. But, I'm seeing a lot of positives in the way that people feel that life is, there's more to life than business. And I guess it's easy to say that if you've still got a job and you're not, you know, about to get evicted from your house or whatever. But I really like what, you know, the piece that Bill Gates wrote about, you know, the world actually having a bit of a reset. And I think that there's a lot of good stuff that can come out of this fact that we've all had to just go, oh, we have to stop and do things differently.
Yeah, it's good. Awesome. Okay, let me jump to a couple of the questions that are being asked. So first one, which just for our speakers, just jump in if you feel like you want to answer this. So looking back on a crisis, you can see it as a pivot point where you learn something or change something. How do you know what you need to hang on to in a crisis?
I think I'll parrot back what we probably said earlier on, is which, you know, hang on to who you are. You know, and again, as businesses grow, we do forget, why did you start this business in the first place? And I guess one little, you know, way I always ask people to try and deal with this, when you get a question, you know, a customer comes to you with a problem, or a shareholder or whoever, what would you do if that person was your mum? You know, how would you, this is, you know, you don't push them away and say, I can't help you, or, you know, this is too hard. Just always think of it like it's your brother or your mum. What would you do next? I think if you start with that lens, simple as it sounds, it's the answer to most questions. Do the right thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I like that. Anyone else? That one?
Not really. Similar sort of thing. I think the problem is that nothing's ever clear cut in these sorts of things, and we live in a very complex world. I mean, like, you know, even to the extent that the COVID crisis being managed by government and having to factor in health versus social versus economic sort of considerations, there's no clear right or wrong answers. And I think, you know, we've primarily used values as a way of, like, you know, making decisions that are really complex. So at the end of it, when you're trading, I mean, it's harder when you're having to trade off different values that you've got, but when it's very clear cut, like, you know, then go with the values decision. It's, you know, it's just so much easier to be able to explain. It's so much easier to live with over time.
What do you think about if you, let's say you haven't defined your company values at the moment, is now the time to do it? So you've got that lens?
Absolutely, especially when you've got nothing else better to do. It's a good time to clean. It's a good time to clean house somewhat, right? You know, I think it is absolutely. I think a lot of us who have been very fortunate to actually be living, you know, with a bit of investment and are probably, you know, I mean, we've been previously quite well funded. You start building a business that sometimes you kind of go, geez, do we really need that? Like, you know, you can pare back some of this stuff. And then when you actually live in an environment where you don't actually need it as much, you kind of go, actually, why the hell did we have that to start with? You know, you start making a few of those harder decisions for sure.
Your values are not words on the wall either. I think that's really important, you know, and there's nothing worse than a lack of authenticity. You know, if Macquarie Bank in their heyday put up something saying that we're supportive and we put our people first, no one would have believed them. They were aggressive and they were just about, you know, how do we win? And that's okay. That's authentic, right, for their company. So I think, you know, you say, do you come up and create the values for your company? No, as a founder in a small business, your values are who you are. So that's you might not know the answer to that, by the way, but that's what you've got to find out, not what would look good on the wall or what people want to believe. I've often used my example there. If you go on a date and you spend the whole time trying to tell the other person what you think they want to hear, right, you might get laid, but it's not a good basis for a long-term relationship. It's far better off to say, tell the truth about who you are and why you're there and what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, it's good.
It's like, I mean, if you want to know what your company values are, get your employees to, you know, tell you, not you, somebody else, what it's like to work for you. Oh, that's what values are.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Let's try and grab a couple. Oh, do you have another point there, Sharon? Or?
That's right.
No, it's good. Let me try and get it. We've got about 4 or 5 questions to try and get through. This is an interesting one. Any advice for female founders that may not apply to male founders? I'm assuming in relation to crisis. So
let me mansplain that one, Sharon. No, I won't.
That's good.
Again, I don't want to get too philosophical about this, but I think that COVID, and if the world does do a bit of a reset, look, men have to trust their gut and trust their instincts and their deep knowing as much as women do. They maybe just talk about it in different terminology, but women need, trust yourself. Don't do stuff that doesn't feel right for you, and take lots of advice. But at the end of the day, it's your business, it's your life. And like I've said before, you can read books on relationships, you can, you know, go to marriage counselling, but it's not going to give you a good relationship. Just like you can read books on business and you can go to boot camps and all that kind of thing, which is a really good thing to do, but it's not going to make your business succeed. So you have to be comfortable, be authentic, be deeply knowing that what you're doing is right for you and your business.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I mean, I think to add to that, my view is something that we talked about earlier, which is it's often in these moments about getting different perspectives. And I think in a very healthy way, different genders have different views on things. And I think that's actually really awesome. So that might be something to consider as well. If you're two females in a business or two males co-founders, thinking about what it would look like to bring in that kind of external advice that brings a different view.
And it is the, you know, it's the diversity thing, and, you know, and not having groupthink and that kind of stuff. I don't want to talk about specific situations, but, you know, the number of times that I've been, you know, the lead in a meeting, and then I brought one of our sales guys into a meeting once, and suddenly everyone just turned away from me and was talking to the sales guy. And I was like, what happened here? So it still does happen.
Yeah, for sure.
But, you know, women have, I'll stop.
All right, let's take the next question. So this is in terms of impact on startup investments. What are the short-term and long-term impacts of COVID-19?
I'll step in. I'll use a counterexample. I had two funds that came pitching to me in the last month about raising funds and so on. The biggest thing I noticed there was that neither of them had considered the impact of COVID. And I know this sounds bizarre, but their answer to that was that, well, you know, venture capital and low-end private equity is a long-term game. You know, you're looking at 10 years to go in here. And that's valid. But again, as I pointed out before, this is not the same as previous crises. So I think you know, whether it's for your own startup or where you're looking to invest, the most important thing is to have that sit back and say, what do I think things are going to do after this? So, you know, you might look at some trends like, I think remote working, online health are going to do well. I think that outdoor events and gambling are going to take a while to recover. Even if it's that simple, you know, lay it out there and say, well, what are the scenarios now for me? What does the world look like under these three different situations? That's credible. That's something investable. I can weigh them up and see whether or not I believe you. But just pretending it's not there is, you know, the worst form of decision is not making a real decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did a panel last week similar to this where we were talking about investment at this time. And certainly my view is that, I mean, the funds I'm involved in, we are open for business, but we can't ignore COVID, and we're expecting you to have thought through that and what you think that impact looks like, and also be realistic that may have a knock-on effect in terms of the price of valuation and things like that. So yes, we're investing, but it's about, and you know, in our situation, it's about growth capital, not survival capital. So yeah, did Marcus or Sharon, you want to weigh in on that conversation, just the long-term, short-term impacts of startup investments?
Yeah, I can, you know, I mean, look, I think it's largely, you've got to have to weigh up what's happening in the context of, you know, relative to what else is going on in the global markets, particularly financially, right? I mean, the share market has been absolutely smashed globally. So, you know, relative valuations are going to be something that you're going to have to live with. So to your point, Derek, I think that a lot of startups are going to have to pare back their previous valuation methodology and their expectations. You know, and there is a lot of capital out there. It's just that it's probably still very uncertain. So a lot of the startups who have not actually got existing investors and are looking to attract, you know, external funding are probably going to struggle, right? Because pulling the trigger and making any decisions at all, if you put yourself in the shoes of an investor, right, it's going to be hard because there's just so much uncertainty about whether a startup will actually get off the ground in an environment like COVID, much less justify their valuation, all that sort of stuff. So you can almost virtually forget about getting any startup capital from external investors. So you now have to rely on your internal investors, whether it's you, the founders, friends and fools, and those sorts of, types of funding that will allow you to be able to keep going forward. But I wouldn't rely too much on external, or at least plan not to get a lot of external funding.
Okay, that's great. Look, I'm very conscious of time. We've just ticked over, so there are a couple of questions we didn't get to, so apologies for that. I'm just going to give each of our speakers a chance for any final comment that you might have, or anything else that you wanted to say that you haven't got to today, and then I'll just wrap up and finish for those that need to move on.
I'll jump on Marcus's last comment. I guess that valuations are going to be challenged. I think a lot of companies perhaps have been their primary cadence, the cycle they go through is the next raising. And, the valuation principles are, well, what did I raise at last time? I've got to do more than that. The number one priority in any business is to get customers to pay for your product. And if you don't have a pathway from here to there, then, you don't have a business. But if you do, and this is just a tough time, then this may be a great opportunity to bring in some investors at, unfortunately, what's going to be a much reduced price, but to bring in some investors that are betting on your business model and on you for the long term. But I think you got to throw away what you thought the valuation was last year for most businesses. That's an opportunity for me.
That's good. Marcus and Sharon, any final comments from you guys?
Look, for me, it's really just a matter of, look, guys, I think we all understand how tough it is in startup, right? No matter whether the COVID crisis exists or not. If you want a long-term survive in startup, you just have to be able to back yourself. You've got to believe in what you're doing, and you'll find a way to get out of this if you're of the right caliber, I guess, because you're going to find that there's so many other, lurching from crisis to crisis. There are going to be so many of these that you better start getting used to it, and you better start learning from the mistakes of the past so that you can prepare for the next one.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And Sharon, final comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of what sort of businesses, people are doing. But at the end of the day, your business has to survive, when in so many different circumstances. Like, there's just so little that you can control around, the micro environment, or the global environment that your business is operating in. And so, you just got to, if you really think that this is the thing that's, going to consume you, and you want it to consume you for the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, you will just keep going. You'll find a way. You always do.
Awesome. That's so good. Let me, my very quick summary, I've been taking some notes. I mean, so many good takeaways from today, but some of the things I was writing down is that we're living out of our values. We've got to make sure that we keep perspective. In fact, the values we came back to a fair bit, the perspective, and just remembering, where we are and what's going on around us. Think about getting external help was one of the pieces, and getting that different perspective. Make sure you're decisive and upfront on your communications. Cash is really important, and no matter what, you've got to find a way through so that you're there on the other side. Backing yourself and making sure that you know why you got in this for the first place, and going for it and believing in what you can do, and a whole bunch of other things. And then my 2 favorite quotes, of course, were don't nibble at the shit and treat your shareholders like your mum. So I think if you take all that board, that's a huge packed 1 hour of tips, which we are very, very thankful for, Michael, Marcus and Sharon. If people haven't done this, you can click on the reactions, and there's a little hand clap like this that you can do. So we're effectively doing our best to give these guys a clap and thank them for their time. Of course, if we were in person, I would have an extravagant gift that I could physically hand to them, but we're not. So we're just going to have to do a virtual hand clap and say thanks very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
We take Uber Eats. We take Uber Eats, Derek. It's all good.
Oh, Uber Eats. You can deliver alcohol. But I really appreciate you guys sharing some time with us today, and your insights. It's been highly valuable, and yeah, for everyone who's on the call, I think you're all, if you're in that founder situation, we are wishing you the best during this time, and hope that you're safe and that you're finding a way through.
And please, Derek, just quick one here, please, everyone, if you can just leave us some feedback that I've just sent the link. It's in the chat, just very quick survey. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that'll be great for us. I understand the line just for a couple of minutes in case anyone's got any other questions or thoughts, but otherwise we'll close off there, and if you need to head off so that we honour time, and just thank you so much for being a part of our webinar today, and hope it really helped. Thank you.
And thank you, Derek. See you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Sharon.
No worries. Can I just say
See you
one
guys.
other thing, Derek? Are you still there?
Go. Yeah, go. Yep.
For anyone who's still on the line, I like Michael's point about treating your shareholders and your investors and everyone like they're your mum. But I think when you're in the early startup days, you kind of feel like the people with, you know, the money are the people who've got all the power in your life, because you're so, you know, you need their money, you need them to invest in you. But, you know, they're just people too. And so, you know, you really, I remember actually Michael's still there.
Yep.
I did Ignition, Michael, and in like 2014 maybe, and you came and spoke, I think, anyway. And I remember thinking, if I had $100,000, all my problems would be solved. You know, that's all my business would ever need, just this $100,000 investment, you know. And then obviously you realise that, you know, you need, as soon as you get 100,000, you need $1 million and all the rest of it. But the people with the money felt like they were like better people than me because they had money. And you sort of give this deference to investors because it's like they've got your business in their hands. And I'll just say to anybody about, you know, don't take money from people that you don't actually want to be, not friends with, but that you have a beer with or whatever.
Yeah, don't work with assholes.
Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes you don't
short.
know that they're an asshole until they've given you money, and then you have to like their stupid questions and have them, you know, ask you for, you know, spreadsheets and cash flow forecasts that make no sense at all. But you feel beholden to them. So, you know, if people want to invest in your business, you should be grateful that, you know, because they're taking a massive risk on you, but they're just people. Don't put them on a pedestal and think that they're, you know, godlike or something just because they're good money. It's a tricky balance, you know, between respecting your investors, because why on earth would they give you money, you know, but not treating them as if they're some special species of people.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, Sharon. I mean, you know, and I've got to be a bit careful because Derek's one of our investors. So, but you know, but I mean, I've always kind of treated it slightly differently in the sense that, you know, I mean, investors are just customers of yours. It's just that they've just bought a different product, right? They've bought your company rather than your actual, you know, than the product that you've actually created. And I think that you just got to treat them like customers. And there are times, you're absolutely right, where the customers are not the right customer for you, and you should let them go as customers. And there are other times where you do have to treat customers well and make sure they're looked after and informed about what's going on so they continue to support you. But in a startup, my feeling is that a lot of investors are backing you as the founder. And so, you know, like, you know, yes, you can get advice. Yes, they'll give you advice if sought after, but by and large, they're backing your judgment as a founder. And so you've got to be willing to make those judgments. And you're right, you know, it is easy to sometimes defer it back to the investors and say, well, what do you want? But actually, they're not likely to be able to know the business any better than you do. So, you know, you really need to have your own views.
Well, that's the thing. You do know your business, and I should make it clear, I'm not talking about any of the people that you would think that I'm, you know, like, we're really fortunate that we got Larsen Ventures and, you know, brilliant investors like that. But we've had some other bad experiences as well where, you know, you can't fire your investors. You know, you can't tell them to go away because they're there in case if you get to that point. So I'm just saying to people, be super careful about who you take money from.
The way I look at that is that I always would say that not all money is good money, and at the end of the day, if you build value in your business and there's opportunity and you've got the right team in the right market, the money will be there. And so ultimately, if you're doing that, you'll find options, and then you should be doing as much due diligence on your investor as they do on you. And that's the whole character, competency, chemistry thing. And it's that chemistry piece is pretty important as well, to make sure that you're going to be spending a bit of time together. So you know, you want to do it with journey with people that you like hanging out with, I reckon. Okay, we're about 5:15, although I'm conscious we still got 40 people on the line, desperate to hear anything else Michael, Marcus or Sharon might want to ask. Is there any questions, people? You can just unmute. I'll just facilitate this for a little bit and see how we go. Any question you want to ask? You guys are happy to stay in for a couple more minutes? Now's your chance.
I've got till 5:30 because that was what was in my diary. So I'm happy to stay on for 15 minutes, and then I've got to pick up my son.
Okay, all right. Let's go for 15 minutes for those that want to ask a question.
So I just want to ask a question. It's Farah from Akora to Marcus specifically, just because he's still an operating founder. So just in terms of the decision making around COVID, are there any new business opportunities that you are going for that you would have previously not gone for pre-COVID? And what do you believe has fundamentally changed with this?
Yeah, look, I mean, strategically, we're probably not necessarily approaching it much differently. It's just that the timing and prioritizations change. So our product roadmap has always included things like telehealth and these sorts of things. But the opportunity has sort of accelerated, and the adoption of telehealth has really just come to the fore because of COVID. So we're just taking it now rather than sort of trying to sort of go too hard too quickly. It's just that it's just the market's ripe for it. So we're doing that. Payments are part and parcel of that. So doing that. And look, strategically, from a product strategy, as I said, it hasn't really changed. Corporate strategy has changed somewhat because obviously, as a startup, as a venture-backed sort of company, a lot of it's sort of, grow, raise, grow, raise, grow, raise. That's currently been the sort of strategy, I guess, corporately. But to my previous point, like you've got to be really much more careful about how much cash you bring in and where you bring it from. And when you're likely to be able to need that cash, you need to manage that much more carefully. So our thinking around how we raise capital and where we raise it from has changed the profile of the way that we run the business, so that we're thinking actually that it's much more likely that we're going to have to command our own future. So not having to raise capital as much going forward is the way to go. So right now we're actually pushing more towards profitability or cash flow break even rather than just burn a lot, sort of grow a lot, which is much harder to predict in this sort of environment.
Phew.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions?
If I can ask a sort of related question on that matter, I guess for context, my tool being something that does enable remote work means that there's obviously an opportunity to be identified there, and I'm at the point where having to make the decision whether to chase the growth or whether to just, start real small and just stable is something in the back of my mind. So I'm wondering if anyone can sort of weigh in on their insights if they've been in a growth stage startup and you've had both a really good opportunity, but then obviously the pandemic is not something that we could have experienced before, but, a severe negative and a severe positive to weigh up. How hard do you go into growth, or do you just tread water and see how it pans out at the end,
I mean, it's a generic, there's no one answer to that really, is there? It's you've got to roll that dice yourself. I mean, how risk tolerant are you? If it does come down to losing your house, are you okay with that? Or are you just taking a portion of your wealth to put into this? The risks I took in my 20s, I would not do today at all. But that's just a different life stage. So I guess, and there are times, when your share price is going up, when the value of your company is going up, you should be pursuing growth, because, you'll be able to raise money at a future point at a better price. So that's a great place. Now, when you're in this environment where you don't know your valuation or it's been substantially damaged, well, the formulas don't really work. But, a lot of other people are having these same conversations, and, the old Warren Buffett thing in uncertain times, do you want to be courageous? But there is no answer. I don't think. It is down to, you've got to roll that dice yourself. That's in your hands.
Yeah. And I would think that treading water is never, I shouldn't say never, but I wouldn't have thought that, treading water would be ever like a good place to be.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think that's right. I think as well, just what Marcus was sharing before, that idea of that sort of speed and cash matrix is a good way to think about it as well. Cool.
Yeah.
Another question? Question from someone?
I'll dive in if I may with a quick question to Marcus. Marcus, have you found supply side acquisition easier in these difficult economic times as clinics start being more open-minded to different channels to market?
Yeah, I think it depends on the product. And I guess in our case, as I said, you know, like we had the dental sector, which is one of our largest growing sectors. Literally 60% of those clinics closed overnight. Right. So like, you know, it doesn't matter whether they love your product or not, if they're not even open, like, you know, that's a big problem. And of course, it's literally now changed back the other way. Like, you know, the fact that the government's opened up restrictions and now clinics are now able to do scaling cleans and that sort of, because nobody was doing scaling cleans, you know, like a week ago. Now everybody can do it. So it's a bit of just a weird environment. So, you know, you can build a whole bunch of product, which is the point that I was kind of getting at, is that if you think that you can unlock the opportunity in a timely enough manner, and you've got the cash to be able to survive the uncertainty of some of what's going on, go for your life. But if you think that, like, you know, your customers are not going to even be open, what's the point of building that product, right? Like, you know, what, you know, yes, our supply side has been very open to telehealth because they haven't had a choice. But if you were to talk about telehealth a month ago, they would have told you to piss off because they weren't interested in it, right? Like, you know, because they didn't need it, right? Like, you know, so that was, I think that's half the problem, is that it's a very fickle and uncertain market right now. But supply side is, yeah, yes and no.
Thank you.
Nice. Any final questions?
Do you have a checklist of how you can add value during COVID-19? Like, are there some things that have immediately become priorities to increase valuation?
Do you mean, so you're thinking about, you might just explain that one a bit more. Was that Sharon? I didn't see there, but Jazz, yeah.
Yeah, so if the valuations have been so impacted, like some of them brutally, I've heard some figures that valuations pre-COVID have dropped for up to 70%. Is there some kind of value add that makes sense during COVID-19 that wouldn't have before?
Do you mean to keep the valuation higher or to keep it higher?
Yeah. Is it just about growing revenues with customers, or is it about cutting costs, or what has become the priority, I guess, to increase valuations?
Well, I mean, Michael's probably got a view on this to share, and I think as well, but I mean, I guess my view on that is that valuation at the end of the day is always around what a buyer is prepared to pay. And often they're thinking about future value. So when I think about a company, I'm paying a certain price relative to the progress they've made and milestones they've hit if it's a startup company. And I'm thinking about how much other value I can add to that calculation by virtue of the business model that says what growth looks like. And there's somewhere in the middle that you meet of those two things. So progress and then future. And I guess that the trouble at the moment is that the future is very unknown. So it's very hard to attribute future value unless it's a business which has got a growth trajectory at the moment. So perhaps, you know, I mean, Marcus could probably talk to this, but if you think about Health Engine, suddenly telehealth has opened up. That presents an opportunity that you could attribute more value to, but at the same time, they lost their dental market for a while, so you're losing value. So, but at the end of the day, I think that always still comes down to your investor, how they are choosing to value the business and put a price on that in no different way that you'd be trying to sell your house or something. I'm not sure there's a definitive list of do these things that changes that. I mean, I know a lot of the companies, I mean, I literally had an investment that we were about to sign. In fact, the company that we're investing in had the closing documents over a weekend to sign. And I had to come in on a Monday morning because their business we assumed was going to get hit quite hard by COVID. And at that exact point say, we can't invest. I mean, a horrible thing to have to do. But that was the reality of how we then suddenly valued the business literally from one week to the next. And they couldn't have cut costs on anything different, but it just really changed the investment dynamic for us. So I don't know if anyone's got sort of Sharon, Marcus or Michael thoughts on that, but
Yeah, well, Marcus made a point earlier on, you know, your shares are just a product. And, you know, I walk into a department store, I can buy a jacket from 10 different brands. Now, a year ago, you know, equities were pricey. So, you know, being able to go out there and say, where do I put my money? People went searching for alpha. So we moved into more risky assets. like private equity or you know, a private debt or into venture capital. Now that's just shifted. Private, you know, public markets have just gotten a lot cheaper. There's still quality stocks out of there that I can put my money into today. So my first starting point would be, you know, if you don't raise capital, is your company going to exist in 12 months? And for a whole lot of companies, the answer to that is no. And capital now, you know, investors are conserving their cash. So you need the money, and I've got the money. So let go of your valuation. You just got a lot cheaper. Now, of course, there's another flip to that, which maybe you simply don't have a business now. As in the world has shifted, as we said beforehand, and the reality may be that your company is now worth nothing. Or it could be the other way around. You're well positioned to come out of this stronger because the world has shifted around you and your product is now that much more attractive.
Cool. There's a question that's popped up. I'll go, Marcus. Yep.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say that I got a piece of advice from one of our large investors that I thought was curious, but you know, probably fairly pertinent in this conversation. And that's just to say that we're in a weird time right now, right? And you know, COVID, you could kind of use to cover up quite a few sins. So right, and so you know, to the extent that you had trouble with revenue growth, you can now kind of say, hey, look, right, COVID is kind of like, you know, like caused problems for so you know, like, but if you're gonna like, you know, if you're gonna do that, right, make sure that's what I'm saying about cleaning house. Make sure that you do have a solid business, but you can sort of, you know, use COVID. Don't waste a good crisis, basically, right? If you're gonna try, you know, create a narrative that makes sense, use COVID, you know, appropriately. Right, don't lie, obviously, but the point here is that, like, you know, it will hide a lot of the fact that, oh, well, you didn't have growth. Oh, it was COVID. Okay, I get that, right? People will understand that. But if you, like, you know, if you're looking for a valuation right now, you've got to understand that the demand and supply dynamics are such that it's not in your favor when you're looking to raise capital. That's all. So be realistic, right? So yeah, that's all.
Yeah, that's good. Nice. Question from Lacey. Any risks you've added to your risk management plan that weren't there before COVID-19? Any surprises? I think one is, what do we do when there's the next global pandemic? That's one that's on there, but any others that have popped up?
Toilet paper?
I mean, toilet paper, yeah. I mean, one of the things, just while you're thinking of an answer, all the companies I work with, we go through a 90-day planning cycle, and one of the things that we do is we always look at external trends that we might need to respond to, and it's something I think Michael talked about before, is this idea of your away days and things, and it's if you can create a rhythm where you're constantly looking at those things, and it's reasonably short term, and it's based on a model that some people may be familiar with by a guy called Vern Harnish called Scaling Up, and he sort of has this principle that, you know, we write these big long strategic plans, but in reality, most of us don't know what we're doing in 6 months, 1 year, let alone 3 years and 5 years. And so the idea of the 90 days is perhaps a time frame that you've got at least some visibility of. Even in that, of course, we wouldn't have necessarily seen COVID as quick as it came. But I think if you've got a rhythm in your business of that type of short-term 90-day planning, it can often help find those things faster and therefore respond to them. But any other thoughts on risks that weren't around that are? No. Yeah, no, okay, we'll leave that one. Any, what are we, 5:27? One more question.
Could I ask that, if that's all right, Derek?
Yeah, go, Matt. Yep.
Yeah, this is for Michael. So obviously being from Hip Flask and in the events industry, I think you mentioned you were doing some stuff with events as well. I was just wondering what the general view is in terms of when live events are going to happen again, and is there any silver linings to COVID that you can see?
Look, I don't know any more about that than anyone else. I think, unfortunately, you know, the business I'm a partial investor in is called Geeked In. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
So they do indie music is their core business in Sydney and Melbourne. I guess, and I'm not declaring any secrets here. I guess the pathways they're looking to, is there alternative paths? How long is the ramp up going to be? Small venues where people are packed shoulder to shoulder to see indie bands are probably going to be the last out, right? So, you know, it's, you know, so hence my point. I think sitting back and saying, let's buckle down and wait to ride this out is not good advice. As Sharon said, you know, that's not the right thing to do. You know, I don't believe in the U-shaped recovery. I think that is just wishful thinking. You know, so, and even the V-shaped recovery is about, you know, it's about degree, isn't it? Velocity, not about reality. So, but you know, where perhaps a better idea is to try and, as I said before, perhaps write down some scenarios of what you think the world might look on a tough day, on a good day. You know, if everything lines up the way you want it, if it doesn't in 12 months. And you know, the one thing I think that will change after this is, you know, it's been 30 years since Australia had a recession, you know, and most people, you know, I'm 50 years old. I wasn't in the workforce when the last recession was held. So and my mum was making that point to me about, you know, when she was growing up, you know, you paid off your house and you tried to make sure you had a year's income in the bank if you possibly could. That was what you aspired to. But, you know, we've lived in a world where we're in love with debt, and house prices were always going to go up and debt credit was always going to be available. So I think one of the flip backs will be that conservatism, you know, that your business now, you need to have a, you know, you need to have a belief that you've got 12 months worth of runway at any time. Yeah, that's a big shift for all businesses to have to try and cope with, and for investors.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and to that point, I remember, you know, one of our really make a fucking profit, just, you know, and then one of my other investors was like, what do you want to make a profit for? You know, it's all about, you know, just getting your revenues up and, you know, having the margins and having the, you know, projections and yada, yada. And maybe that's going to happen now, that there's going to be a little bit more realism about the fact that your revenue, so that you can get a valuation based on X times. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard a couple of US VCs suddenly going, well, we've decided that now there's a really important question to ask around profit. And it was like in building business, and it's sort of like, when did that not become part of the sensibility of just building good business? All right, well, thanks everyone. We've hit 5:30. Really appreciate Grant in the background there. Hi, Grant. We really appreciate Michael and Marcus and Sharon. Thanks so much for your time once again, and particularly just taking that extra 30 minutes at the end for some additional questions. And thanks everyone for spending some time with us, and hope it's really helped. And yeah, we'll see you soon. All right, thanks everyone.
See you guys. Bye.